What happens when two of the most outspoken women in entertainment collide on live television and one refuses to back down while the other gets completely caught off guard? You're about to witness one of the most explosive confrontations ever captured on daytime TV, where diplomatic smiles turned into verbal warfare and carefully crafted public personas crumbled in real time. This isn't just another celebrity spat. This is what happens when years of built-up tension finally explode on national television. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment because you won't believe how this unfolds. The atmosphere in the View studio was already thick with anticipation as Meghan Markle settled into the guest chair, her perfectly styled hair catching the studio lights. She had that familiar composed smile, the one that had charmed millions, but also raised questions among critics. Sharon Osbourne sat at the panel table, her silver hair gleaming, fingers drumming silently against her coffee mug. The other hosts exchanged glances, sensing something brewing beneath the surface. Whoopi Goldberg had just finished the standard warm welcome when Sharon leaned forward slightly, her British accent cutting through the pleasantries like a blade. "Meghan darling, I have to ask something that I think our viewers are dying to know. You've spoken extensively about your struggles with the royal family, but I'm curious about something. When you sat down with Oprah and made those very serious allegations, did you ever consider the impact those words would have on an elderly woman who had just lost her husband?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Meghan's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she composed herself. "Sharon, I think what you're referring to is simply me sharing my truth about experiences that were genuinely harmful to my mental health and well-being." "Your truth," Sharon repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Because truth is usually just truth, not something that belongs to one person. When you accused unnamed members of the royal family of racism, that wasn't just your truth. That was an accusation that painted an entire institution with a very serious brush." Meghan shifted in her seat, her media training kicking in. "I think it's important to understand that I never intended to hurt anyone. I was simply speaking about conversations that actually happened. Conversations that were concerning to me as someone who was about to bring a child into the world." "Oh, conversations that actually happened." Sharon's eyebrows shot up. "But you've never actually said who these conversations were with, have you? You threw out this explosive allegation, watched the world react with outrage, and then sat back while everyone speculated about who the racist royal might be. That's not sharing your truth, darling. That's lighting a fuse and walking away from the explosion." The studio audience was completely silent now. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. Whoopi tried to interject. "Well, I think what Meghan was trying to convey was the emotional impact of those experiences." But Sharon wasn't finished. She turned her sharp gaze back to Meghan. "You know what really gets me? You had everything handed to you on a silver platter. You married into the most famous family in the world, had a fairy tale wedding that cost taxpayers millions, lived in palaces, wore priceless jewelry, and had the entire Commonwealth watching your every move with fascination. And somehow you managed to turn all of that into a victim narrative." Meghan's composure was beginning to crack. "Sharon, I don't think you understand what it's like to be isolated, to have your passport taken away, to be told you can't seek mental health treatment when you're genuinely struggling. Isolated." Sharon's voice rose slightly. "You had staff waiting on you hand and foot. You had more luxury than most people could dream of in 10 lifetimes. And you're telling me you were isolated? Do you know what isolation looks like for regular people? It looks like working 3 jobs to pay rent, not having a security detail in a palace suite." "This isn't about luxury," Meghan protested, her voice getting defensive. "This is about basic human dignity and being treated with respect." Sharon laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Human dignity? You mean like the dignity you showed the Queen when you scheduled that Oprah interview to air while Prince Philip was literally on his deathbed? You mean like the dignity you showed your own father when you cut him out of your life completely and never spoke to him again after he made one mistake? That kind of human dignity." The other hosts were exchanging worried glances now. This was going far beyond typical daytime television discourse. Meghan's hands were visibly trembling slightly as she gripped the arms of her chair. "My relationship with my father is complicated and I don't think it's fair to reduce it to one mistake," Meghan said. But her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Complicated," Sharon repeated mockingly. Everything is complicated when you're the one being held accountable, isn't it? But when you're pointing fingers at others, when you're making accusations about racism and neglect, suddenly everything is black and white. Your father, who worked his entire life and literally won a lottery ticket so he could afford to give you the best education money could buy, made the mistake of talking to tabloid photographers and you wrote him off completely. But somehow the royal family who welcomed you with open arms gave you a platform and made you one of the most famous women in the world. They are the villains in your story. Meghan was clearly struggling now. You don't know the full story about my father, and you certainly don't know what it was like for me inside that institution, don't I? Sharon's voice was getting sharper with each exchange. Because from where I sit, it looks like you have a pattern. Every relationship that doesn't serve your narrative gets thrown under the bus. Your father, your half-sister, your former friends, your royal in-laws, even your husband's family who raised him. Everyone else is always the problem. But somehow you're always the victim. Do you see the pattern there, Meghan? The tension in the studio was now palpable. Cameras were capturing every micro-expression, every shift in body language. This was no longer an interview. It was becoming a psychological dissection on live television. Meghan's face was flushed now, her carefully maintained composure cracking under Sharon's relentless questioning. I think you're being incredibly unfair and reductive about situations that are far more complex than you're making them out to be. Unfair. Sharon's voice pitched higher with disbelief. Let me tell you what's unfair, sweetheart. What's unfair is watching you sit here and play the victim while real people, people without your resources and privilege, deal with actual hardship every single day. What's unfair is watching you turn every legitimate criticism into an attack on your character or your race when the reality is that people are questioning your actions, not your identity. That's not what I'm doing, Meghan protested. But her voice was shaking now. When people make racist comments or treat you differently because of who you are, that's not playing the victim. That's calling out discrimination. Sharon leaned forward, her eyes blazing. Show me the racist comments from the royal family. Show me one quote, one documented instance where anyone in that family said anything racist about you, because what I heard in that Oprah interview was a lot of vague insinuations and unnamed accusations, but I didn't hear any actual evidence. The conversations about my son's skin color were very real and very concerning, Meghan insisted, her media training clearly failing her now. Were they though? Kyron shot back immediately. Because even Oprah had to clarify later that you told her it wasn't the Queen or Prince Philip who made those comments. So who was it then? And what exactly was said? Because wondering about what a baby might look like is pretty normal human curiosity. My own grandchildren are mixed race, and trust me, we've all wondered and talked about what they might look like. That's not racism. That's family conversation. Meghan looked genuinely stunned by this response. I think the context and the way it was said made it problematic. The context you've never actually explained to anyone, Sharon pressed on mercilessly. You made an explosive accusation that damaged reputations and relationships, but you've never provided any actual details that would allow people to judge for themselves. Whether this was innocent family curiosity or genuine racism, seeking justice, that's character assassination. Joy Behar tried to step in. I think maybe we should consider that Meghan's experience might be different from yours, Sharon. But Sharon wasn't having it. Different how? Because she's American. Because she's mixed race. Because she's an actress. I'm sorry, but experience doesn't give you the right to make serious accusations without backing them up with facts. And it certainly doesn't give you the right to destroy relationships and reputations based on your interpretation of private conversations. Meghan was visibly struggling now, her hands fidgeting with her jewelry. I never wanted to destroy anything. I was just trying to protect my mental health and my family. Protect your family. Sharon's laugh was sharp and bitter. By publicly humiliating your husband's grandmother on international television, by airing private family business that embarrassed people who couldn't defend themselves publicly. By creating a media storm that followed them for months during one of the most difficult periods of their lives. That's how you protect your family. Harry supported my decision to do that interview, Meghan said weakly. Did he though? Sharon's eyes narrowed. Or did he support you? Because that's what husbands do, even when they know their wives are making a mistake. Because from what I've observed, Harry has looked increasingly uncomfortable with the public spotlight you've dragged him into. The man gave up his military career, his charitable work, his relationship with his family, and his entire identity to follow you to California, where he now makes podcasts and Netflix documentaries instead of serving his country. It was his choice, Meghan protested. But she was clearly on the defensive now. Was it really his choice or was it an ultimatum? Shun pressed. Because it seems awfully convenient that every major decision in your relationship has resulted in Harry becoming more isolated from everyone and everything he cared about before he met you. His friends, his family, his career, his country. That's not love, darling. That's control. The audience was completely silent now, watching this psychological dissection unfold in real time. Meghan looked like she wanted to flee, but the cameras were rolling and she was trapped. I resent the implication that I've controlled or manipulated Harry in any way, Meghan said, but her voice lacked conviction. Harry is a grown man who makes his own decisions. Is he though? Sharon leaned back slightly, her voice becoming almost conversational, which made her words even more devastating. Because from where I sit, it looks like Harry went from being a beloved prince who is known for his charity work and military service to being a man who complains about his family on television for money. That's quite a transformation, isn't it? Meghan's face was bright red. Now Harry is sharing his truth about growing up in that family, about the pressures and expectations that were placed on him. There's that phrase again, your truth, Sharon said with obvious disdain. Here's an actual truth for you, Meghan. Harry was born into unimaginable privilege. He had the best education money could buy. He served his country with honor. He had meaningful work that actually helped people. And he was adored by millions around the world. And somehow you've convinced him that all of that was actually trauma and oppression. You don't understand the pressure of that life. Meghan tried again, but she sounded defeated now, don't I? Sharon's voice rose again. I've been in the public eye for decades. I've dealt with tabloids, criticism, invasion of privacy, and public scrutiny that would make most people crumble. But I never confused scrutiny with persecution, and I never blamed everyone else for the consequences of my own choices. Whoopi was looking increasingly uncomfortable, clearly wanting to steer the conversation elsewhere, but Sharon was far from finished. You know what really bothers me about your whole narrative, Meghan? It's not just that it's self-serving. It's that it's dangerous. When you cheapen real racism by calling every criticism racist, when you turn privilege into oppression and comfort into suffering, you make it harder for people who are actually facing genuine discrimination to be believed. Meghan was shaking her head now, looking genuinely distressed. That's not what I'm doing. I would never minimize real racism or discrimination. Wouldn't you, though? Sharon's voice was relentless now because that's exactly what you did when you suggested that concerns about your son's appearance were automatically racist. When you turned normal family dynamics into evidence of institutional prejudice and when you used your platform to suggest that one of the most respected institutions in the world was fundamentally corrupted by racism. All without providing any actual evidence to support those claims. The silence in the studio was deafening as Meghan sat there visibly shaken by Sharon's words. Her hands were trembling now, and the confident woman who had walked onto the set was nowhere to be seen. Sharon, sensing the moment, pressed forward with surgical precision. You want to know what I think this is really about, Meghan? Sharon's voice had dropped to an almost whisper, making everyone lean in. I think this is about a woman who thought she could waltz into the most famous family in the world and change everything to suit her needs. And when she discovered that institutions don't bend to individual demands, she decided to burn it all down rather than adapt. Meghan's voice was barely audible now. That's not true. I tried to fit in. I really did. Did you though? Sharon's eyebrows shot up again. Because from what I understand, you lasted less than 2 years before you decided the whole thing was impossible. 2 years, Meghan, most people spend longer than that learning a new job. But you expected to master centuries of tradition and protocol in what, a few months? The institution wasn't willing to protect me, Meghan said. But even she seemed to realize how weak it sounded. Sharon let out a harsh laugh. Protect you from what? From tabloid coverage. Welcome to being famous, darling. From public scrutiny that comes with the territory when you marry a prince. From having to follow rules and traditions. That's literally what being part of the royal family means. You're oversimplifying everything, Meghan protested. But there was no fire left in her voice. Am I? Sharon leaned forward again, her voice becoming deadly serious. Let me ask you something directly, and I want you to answer honestly. When you married Harry, did you genuinely believe you could be part of the royal family while maintaining your Hollywood lifestyle and your political activism? Did you really think you could change an institution that has survived for over 1,000 years to accommodate your personal preferences? Meghan opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly struggling to find an answer that wouldn't make her look even worse. Sharon didn't wait for a response. Because if you did believe that, then you were incredibly naive. And if you didn't believe it, then you went into that marriage knowing you were going to blow it up, which makes everything that followed a calculated performance rather than genuine suffering. I went into that marriage with love and hope, Meghan said quietly. But Sharon was relentless. Love and hope for what? For Harry or for what Harry could give you access to? Because looking at your actions, it seems like you love the idea of being a princess right up until you realized that being a princess actually requires sacrifice and service, not just photo opportunities and designer gowns. The other hosts were looking increasingly uncomfortable, but the audience was completely captivated. This was television gold, and everyone knew it. I did want to serve, Meghan insisted. I had ideas about how to modernize and expand the royal family's reach. Your ideas, Sharon repeated with obvious scorn. Your ideas about how to fix an institution that has successfully navigated world wars, political upheavals, and social revolutions for centuries. The hubris of that statement is just breathtaking. Meghan, you think you, an actress from cable television, were going to teach the British monarchy how to do their job better. Meghan was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but Sharon showed no mercy. And when they politely declined your suggestions, when they tried to guide you through the actual responsibilities of your role, you decided they were racist, oppressive rather than experienced and traditional. They silenced me, Meghan whispered through her tears. No, they didn't. Sharon's voice was flat and final. They asked you to follow the same rules that everyone else in that family follows, including your husband, including the future king and queen. But you interpreted guidelines as oppression because you've never been in a situation where you weren't the center of attention and you couldn't do exactly what you wanted. Whoopi finally managed to interrupt. I think maybe we should take a breath here and consider that there might be multiple perspectives on this situation, but Sharon wasn't finished. She turned her gaze back to Meghan, who was still crying. You know what the most tragic part of this whole thing is? Harry genuinely loved you. I could see it in every interview, every public appearance. That man was completely devoted to you. And instead of treasuring that love and building a life together within the constraints of his family and his duties, you convinced him that everyone who loved him before you met him was actually his enemy. That's not what happened, Meghan sobbed. But there was no conviction left in her voice. Isn't it though? Sharon pressed on ruthlessly. His grandmother, who raised him after his mother died, who gave him purpose and meaning through his royal duties, suddenly she's the head of a racist institution. His father, who tried to include you and welcome you into the family, suddenly he's unsupportive. And cold. His brother, his lifelong best friend and closest confidant, suddenly he's jealous and competitive. Everyone who loved Harry before you came along, somehow became the villain in your story. The cameras were capturing every moment of Meghan's breakdown. And Sharon was clearly building to her final point. But here's what I think really happened. Meghan, I think you met a man who was genuinely good, genuinely decent, and genuinely committed to service and duty. And instead of falling in love with who he actually was, you fell in love with what you thought you could turn him into. You saw a prince and thought you could make him into your personal activist and celebrity lifestyle accessory. Meghan was openly sobbing now, her makeup ruined, her composure completely shattered. That's not true. I love Harry for who he is. Do you, though? Sharon's final question hung in the air like a death sentence. Because the Harry you love doesn't exist anymore, does he? The Harry who served his country with pride, who had close relationships with his family, who found meaning in duty and tradition, that Harry is gone. The man you're married to now is a shadow of who he used to be. And deep down, I think you know that the silence that followed was absolute. Even the camera operators seemed afraid to move. Meghan sat there completely broken, tears streaming down her face, unable to respond to Sharon's devastating final assessment. Whoopi finally managed to speak, her voice barely steady. Well, this has certainly been an intense conversation. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back we'll be talking about holiday gift ideas for the family. But nobody was thinking about holiday gifts. The audience, the crew, the other hosts, everyone was still processing what they had just witnessed. Sharon sat back in her chair looking satisfied but not triumphant, as if she had simply stated obvious truths that everyone else had been too polite to say out loud. As the cameras stopped rolling, Meghan remained in her chair, still crying, looking like someone who had just been psychologically dismantled on live television. And perhaps, in a way, she had been. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Have you ever seen someone get completely dismantled like this on live television? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more unbelievable celebrity moments like this.